Hello everyone, I'm Koyan and today we are going to learn how to answer questions related to chapter 12, coordination and response in humans. So I know it consists of human nervous system and the endocrine system whereby we learn a lot of hormones. But for the human endocrine system, right? Oh well, it actually came out a lot last year during the essay question in section B. So I think only you probably won't really ask much about endocrine system. Instead, I think they will put more focus towards this human nervous system. Therefore, I'm going to emphasize more on this. And it's also very obvious. You can see the past year paper question for this chapter. Majority of them is human nervous system, consisting of this how to identify neurons, the spinal cords, the involuntary, voluntary actions, transmission of nerve impulses. So let's take a look at this. So before we identify which one is the sensory neuron, motor neuron, okay, yeah, there are actually three types now. So first of all, when you want to sense the stimulus, right? Yeah, the nerve impulse is triggered and then yeah, it will be sent through this sensory neuron first. And later on, it will actually go to the relay neuron. And then you enter your brain and then the information, interpret the information. And last but not least, when you want to do a response, yeah, the nerve impulse will be transmitted through this motor neuron. So motor neuron, you can see it performs the motor action. Yeah, that's why it's called the motor neuron. So the last one is the motor neuron. So first of all, you sense it first and then go to relate and last but not least motor neuron and then you only produce the response. So how can you identify what are differences between them? So this one, first of all, we can see this is the cell body. But can you see the difference between these two cell body? They actually locate different place, right? One is at the middle, one is at the end of it. And other than that, can you see this like bless me. Okay. This is actually the dendrite. And yeah, for this one is the dendrite. Like the branching out. I mean, cannot say branching out because here also branching. Like it looks like a line like that, a root like that. What about this? Is it a dendrite? No, because you can see this last part is like the bigger part. So this is actually a synaptic knot. Synaptic knot. Synaptic knot. That's why you can see like the branching part. This one doesn't end with like a shaded darker, region thicker. And this, yeah, is the synaptic walk pula, knot. And here is the axon. Here is also the axon. Okay, if we want to take a look in more detail, yeah, we got learn the myelin sheet and node of Ranvier. Myelin sheet is the layer of insulation right here. So this is the myelin sheet. And here, like, the part that is not covered with myelin sheet is the node of Ranvier. But normally they won't ask in very detail lah. Normally they just ask which one is cell body, dendrite, synaptic knob. Yeah. So yeah, the same thing for this neuron. So how can you actually identify? So the most obvious difference is actually through looking the cell body and whether is it attached to the dendrite. So this cell body and the dendrite, they are in a different area. Meanwhile, for this cell body right here, it is attached to the dendrite. To this dendrite. Cell body attached to the dendrite. But this one, cell body is in the middle, and then it is not attached to dendrite. So very obvious, this one is actually the sensory neuron. And for this is actually the motor neuron. Because right, when they transmit, they transmit until here normally is the muscle cell, the effector cell, like muscle cell, muscle tissue. So the muscle tissue will produce the response. So yeah, it's from here and then transmit to here. Yeah, this one is also the same thing, just that yeah, it will be connected to the relay neuron. So how does relay neuron looks like? It looks way different. So if you take a look at your textbook, this part, relay neuron, they straight out looks in this way. This is the relay neuron. So you can see a very obvious difference between them. Just that motor and sensory is quite hard to differentiate. I mean, the way to differentiate very hard for you to understand. You just have to memorize for this identification. Is basically cell body is at the middle and is not attached to dendrite. That one is a sensory neuron. Meanwhile, for the relay neuron, is like it itself just straight out branch in this way. It's a very shorter version. And then last but not least, motor neuron is whereby your cell body is at the end and is attached to the dendrite. So this is how you differentiate between them. So after 5 minutes talking about it, yeah, this is the neuron P, sensory neuron. And then what is the function of neuron Q? So neuron Q is motor neuron. It is the one that will send the nerve impulse, transmit nerve impulse, or you can write send lah, pulses. Okay, most importantly is through the effector so that the effector such as the muscle cell can produce the response. So it transmits from the central nervous system to the effector. You have to emphasize it is the one that transmits to the effector from central nervous system to effector. Okay, moving on is talking about similarities alamak. Okay, of the structure between neuron P and Q. So there are so many similarity. But for this question, it consists of 2 marks. So what if lah? What if I don't know how to answer? I know a lot of similarity, but I don't know how to explain. Yeah, you can only just get 1 mark, even though you mentioned 2 similarity. Okay, so normally you put the most confident similarity and the one you can explain in the most confident way. So the similarity between structure P and Q, yeah, they all have cell body, axon, dendrite, myelin sheath, node of Van Weir, right? So you have to know one of them, their function, because you mentioned similarity, then you only mention the function. So here are the similarities and the explanations with it. So it is a must to explain. Yeah. So these are the possible answers you can actually provide. So what is the function of cell body? Okay, so you both neurons have cell body. Then you explain similarity to integrate impulses. And then both have axon to carry impulses out of the cell body to other neurons or maybe to effector. And then both also have dendrites. What do dendrite do? Not dendrite, dendrite. So it is the one that can see this one. It receives the nerve impulse from other neuron, right? So yeah, receive impulse from other neurons. What about myelin sheath? Maybe you want to mention that in detail. Yeah, it is acts as an impulse insulator and many other functions supply nutrients to axon also and protect neurons from injury. Last but not least, why do you want a gap right there like suddenly don't have the myelin sheath? It is actually to speed up the transmission of impulse. Yeah. Okay, that's all. How are you going to explain? So normally how they mark is they mark the similarities 1 mark and they see whether you can explain it correctly based on the similarity you've mentioned. Yeah. Okay. Now moving on, okay. Okay, this one is just mentioning it to you the most general on how this whole response work like how it produces a response from the stimulus it detects. So students find it hard to explain because following question they always ask you to explain about it lah. So first of all, you mentioned what is the stimulus, and you can get 1 mark normally lah. Okay, so you mentioned in detail because now I'm writing a general form lah. Maybe you can say light or maybe a sharp pin prick. Okay, so stimulus. So this stimulus maybe something you feel something very pain or you see something. So this is a stimulus, and it will be detected by sensory receptor in sensory organ. So what are the sensory receptor? We actually got learned like photoreceptor, chemoreceptor, baroreceptor. Yeah, those are the sensory receptor. Nociceptor, yeah. And in the sensory organ, let's say you want to talk about the light stimulus, it is detected by the sensory, okay, example, photoreceptor in your sensory organ. Where is your sensory organ? Is in your eyes. Yeah, this is the example lah. Okay. And then the nerve, okay, after you detect this stimulus, nerve impulse will be triggered. Yeah, triggered. Okay, nerve impulse triggered and sent to the brain. So when you want to send to brain, what you use to send? Okay, not use WhatsApp. Okay, WhatsApp pula. It will send through neuron. So what are the neuron involved? It's normally sensory neuron to relay neuron lah. Okay, sensory neuron to relay neuron. Sensory neuron comes first because it's the ones that sense it. Yeah, that's how I memorize that the according neuron. And then the brain will actually interpret this impulse, which is called the integration center. And then now they want to produce a response. So they will transmit this impulse through this motor neuron. So this motor neuron transmits the impulse to the effector. Most of the situation is muscle lah. Yeah, your skeletal muscle or maybe smooth muscle when it comes to involuntary response. And after that, it will produce the response. So let's say you want to slap someone. Okay, so effector is your skeletal muscle. So you produce response to, yeah, don't do violence. Sorry. Okay, so for this part, it's not slapping lah. It's a cricket player during a match. He want explain the nerve impulse transmission process for the player's response. So how are you going to explain? First of all, talk about the stimuli being detected by the sensory receptor. So yeah, you can see your eyes sensory organ, it detect stimuli. And then nerve impulse. So you detect what you do. Nerve impulse is triggered because they have to transmit in form of nerve impulse. So the nerve impulse triggered later on, the impulse will be sent to the brain. So by using what neuron, what highway, what pathway? Through your sensory neuron and relay neuron. Okay, then your brain will actually, yeah, interpret it. So after interpretation of this info, right, the brain knows that it wants to produce a response. So it will send out the nerve impulse, send to effector. So if you want to be in more detailed manner, you can say muscles, no? So using what neuron? Wire motor neuron. And then you only mention what is the response? The response, the muscle contract and relax lah. Maybe like contract and relax to swing the bat. So this is how the whole thing works lah. Okay. First of all, you can mention the stimuli and then trigger the nerve impulse and then send to your brain through the sensory neuron and relay neuron. And then brain you can add on maybe this essay question you can mention the brain will actually interpret the nerve impulse and followed by sending the nerve impulse nerve impulse to be sent to the effector through the motor neuron. And what is the effect? The response. The muscle will contract to swing the bat. Okay, so what will actually happen to the player's response if motor neurons are injured? Motor neurons are injured. Okay, so motor neurons injured. Okay, he can actually, first of all, okay, the first few process, it still can occur in a normal way. Oh, you can detect the stimuli, all these things. But this part starts injured. So injured means it can't really do its function. Okay. So when this part injured, what will it affect? It will actually affect the response, right? So you can mention what happens to the response. First of all, initially it can, contract to swing the bat, right? Because the motor neuron can send the nerve impulse to the effector, but now cannot send. So cannot send to the effector, therefore your muscle cannot contract to swing the bat. Yeah. So you state what happened first. The players unable to swing the bat, or you want to say hit the ball because the action. Yeah. Okay, swing the bat. But if they want you to explain, because this one just 1 mark, so actually you cannot produce a response, yeah, you get 1 mark already, but you have to be specific. What is the response? Unable to swing the bat or hit the wall, yeah, get 1 mark. But if they want you to explain, right, you can say it's because, right, the nerve impulse cannot be sent to muscle. So when there's no nerve impulse to be sent to the muscle cannot contract and relax to swing the bat lah. That's why he unable to swing the bat. That's how it works lah. But he can actually detect the stimuli because the sensory neuron, relay neuron, the sensory receptor, all this work well. Just that when it comes to producing response, yeah, motor neuron fails to function. Injured lah. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the next one right here is talking about part of motor neuron and cross section of synaptic knot. So just now, yeah, this is actually the zoom in version of the synaptic knot right here. Alamak, draw wrongly. This one. Okay, this one is actually dendrite from other neurons already lah. Okay. So for this, name the parts labeled T and chemical substance released at T. So by taking a look in detail right here, yeah, you can see is actually an organelle. So this organelle is actually very important, which is the powerhouse generator that generate energy powerhouse of the cell. So it's mitochondria. And this is actually a synaptic vesicle. So normally it will transmit in form of electrical impulse. But when it comes to transmitting to another neuron, right, they have to transmit in a form of in a chemical form. So what is the chemical form? It is actually called a neurotransmitter. The chemical substance is called neurotransmitter. So this, neurotransmitter is actually inside the synaptic vesicle lah. So this, they will diffuse out. So this in a form of neurotransmitter. So once it reach to the another dendrite of the receiving neuron, then it will continue to travel in form of electric impulse lah. Okay, so what is actually T? The I say T is neurotransmitter. Wait. Name the parts labeled T and chemical substance released at T. Oh, T is not new. I mean, the chemical substance is neurotransmitter, but T, these parts, yeah, maybe. Okay, yeah, it's true lah because the labeling they didn't really point to the neurotransmitter. That's why it's not neurotransmitter. Okay, the parts of it is they're asking what is the part. So this part is actually called a synapse. So T is actually a synapse. So sorry for that. And then chemical substance released at T is a neurotransmitter. Maybe at English part. Okay. Oh, for this one, do you think is it motor neuron or sensory neuron or relay neuron? So you see the cell body, whether is it attached to the dendrite? Is it at the end? Yeah, it's at the end. It's not in the middle, right? So this one is actually the motor neuron. Okay. Moving on to this part. One transmission of impulse through a neuron actually occurs in one direction. So maybe students might not understand what does this mean. So why is it transmitted in one direction? Cannot flow back and flow like that. Only one direction from this synaptic node into here is only one direction. Okay, the reason why is because you can see this receptor right here, it only stays at here. Okay, it is only present at the dendrite of the receiving neuron. So yeah, the neurotransmitter that is released out right here, it will only bind to the receptor, right? The receptor is at here. It is not at here. That's why it cannot flow in two-way direction lah. The neurotransmitter straight out will bind to the receptor of the dendrite. Receptor of dendrite of receiving neuron. Okay, so the receptor only present at here. That's why the neurotransmitter only bind at the receptor which is present at that. If the receptor doesn't present at here, that's why it only works in one way direction. So the explanation looks like that. Nama. Synaptic vesicle in synaptic node release neurotransmitter into the synapse. So the neurotransmitter diffuse through the synapse and bind to receptor which only found on the membrane of the dendrite of the receiving neuron. Yeah. And it is the synaptic vesicle that only release neurotransmitter, okay, in the synaptic node. So this one is the dendrite. This one is the synaptic node. It only the synaptic vesicle containing neurotransmitter only present at this synaptic node. It doesn't present at here. That's why it only works in one way direction. Okay. Now moving on to explain why it needs to pass through T. Okay, basically why it has to pass through T is to actually continue the transmission now because it's actually from an electrical form and then they have to pass through the synapse to a chemical form. So why it has to pass through? Okay, what if you don't want to pass through? The electrical impulse won't continue, right? So it has to pass through to continue it. So the answer basically talking about to continue transmission of electrical impulse in chemical form across the synapse to the next neuron. Yeah. Continued transmission of electrical impulse is what you can actually get 1 point for. And then to the next neuron, because you want to transmit it to the next neuron. So yeah, this one, they will also give you 1 mark. Yeah, I know it's quite K-but question, like something won't be really mentioned in the textbook. So you really have to write it based on your understanding. Yeah. explain what happened to impulse if absent of V structure. V structure is the mitochondrion. So what happens if they don't have the mitochondrion? So you think of what is the function of this mitochondrion at that? Why is there an abundance of mitochondrion? Is because to generate energy, right? In a normal situation, they want to generate energy because energy is required for the transmission of impulse, right? So what happens if there's an absent? They lesser lesser energy will be generated, less transmission of impulse. So when there's a less transmission of impulse, can you predict what happens to the reaction time? Your reaction will be slower, right? Because it cannot occur in a faster way since lesser energy is generated. So yeah, that basically explains it all. Energy generated, less impulse is transmitted, therefore leads to a slow period of reaction. Okay, now moving on to next question right here. Yeah, so you can see this spinal cord got the gray matter, white matter. Okay, so I will label it to you. Yeah, so the middle part, right, that looks like a butterfly is actually the gray matter. And outside of it is actually the white matter. And this is actually a dorsal root. Okay, a lot of students don't know how to see dorsal root, ventral root. Okay, now let's see this fish right here. Alamak, my fish, what happened? He's actually learned in the chapter 144 lah. So yeah, so let's take a look at this fish right here. Okay, so this part, dorsal is the one that you can see the D, right? It pointing upward, right? So here is the dorsal fin. Yeah, dorsal lah, dorsal part. What about ventral? Ventral ma. You can see the arrow, right? Ventral pointing downward. So yeah, ventral is at the bottom part. So this, how are you going to identify? Normally the top part is dorsal root, pointing down ventral root. And then only dorsal root consists of the ganglion, which consists of cell body of the sensory neuron. So dorsal root ganglion. Okay, and yeah, the most maybe students find it hard to memorize lah. So here you can see, yeah, this one is actually the sensory neuron, right? Sensory neuron. Sensory neuron. So this sensory neuron, every neuron got cell body and their dendrite, right? So the cell body of the sensory neuron is inside this dorsal root ganglion. Sensory neuron. What about the axon? The axon is actually at the dorsal root of sensory neuron, SN. Okay, write it in XN. Okay, and what about the relay neuron and this one is the relay neuron and the relay neuron and motor neuron. So R is the motor neuron and this one is the relay neuron. So you can see that normally gray matter consists of cell bodies because it's dark in color, gray color, so consists of a lot of nucleus long. So consists of cell body of relay, relay and motor neuron. What about the white matter right here? White matter is the one that consists of the um the axon of relay and motor neuron. So why is it white in color? Because normally because of the myelin sheet that makes it white lah. And not why is it gray? Because of the cell bodies. Yeah. Okay. So name P and R. P is basically sensory neuron. R is the motor neuron. Selamat. Yeah, sensory neuron. So remember when they ask you to name, be careful of the spelling because I know in the UK version, our neuron is spelled with the E at the end. When you look from online, right, sometimes they spell it Neuron because it's from normally I think it's America, I think lah. But yeah, remember it is spelled in this way. And how are you going to differentiate between P and R? So basically P is sensory and R is a motor neuron. So you can talk about what is the function of the sensory neuron and motor neuron. So sensory neuron is the one that carry nerve impulse from the sensory organ, sensory receptor to the central nervous system, which is your spinal cord or your brain lah. But you have spinal cord. And what about motor neuron? It is the one that send nerve impulse to your effector. And what about their cell body and the axon? The cell body of the sensory neuron is found in the dorsal root ganglion. Cell body of the motor neuron found in the gray matter of the spinal cord. Yeah, so this is how you actually differentiate between them right here. But yeah, the first answer I think is quite risky to put lah because P and R, the first question they ask what is P and R. So yeah, but this answer scheme they still accept if you differentiate between them. But normally if you scared you because sometimes the answer scheme won't provide this answer, although it's correct, but because the previous question they already asked what is P and R lah, so yeah, but whatever. It really hard to say one lah, okay? And you can talk about yeah, cell body and where it is present. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to the next one right here. Before a surgery, a doctor will inject a patient with anesthetic. So effects of anesthetic to S. So what is actually anesthetic? If you have undergone surgery before, maybe you know what it is better lah. So it is actually administered by the I mean, they will administer it to, you probably in an unconscious mood lah, okay? And you won't feel any pain during that time, most importantly lah. So what do they actually do? It's actually to like, you know, it actually acts like the depressant. So it will actually slow down the transmission of nerve impulse. When you get to slow down transmission of nerve impulse, there will be lesser neurotransmitter will be released, man. So lesser transmission of impulse. That's why you won't actually react much, lah. Yeah, you won't actually feel extremely pain, lah. So because it is a delayed response, delayed signal, or you slow it down, that's why you won't feel really painful because during that time there is this anesthetic. So yeah, you can mention anesthetic is a depressant and it will actually causing less nerve impulse to be triggered or slow down the transmission of impulse. Therefore, there will be lesser neurotransmitter will be released. I mean, this too, sorry. I think the part they mentioned, less neurotransmitter release, therefore slowing down the transmission of nerve impulse. Slow down transmission of nerve impulse. Therefore, it will prevent the feeling of pain. So, yeah, prevent from feeling pain because this is the effect of it. But they ask you to explain, that's why you got mentioned about the transmission of the impulse. Okay, and moving on to the next one right here, type of response. So this you can see is both of them. Yeah, it looks like, this is the knee-jerk one, and the right one is actually, yeah, you contract your hand to actually stay away from the fire, prevent further injury. Okay, so both are actually uh involuntary response because this one you knee jerk it is a spontaneous response lah. Okay, very quick response. And yeah, the right hand side one, you also, move away your hand quickly, right? So it is actually an involuntary response. So for involuntary response, right, it actually involves a spinal cord. Yeah, because it won't be like, yeah, it involves the spinal cord lah. So, but the main thing to differentiate between them is the reflex arc. There are two types of reflex action. One is three neuron reflex arc, another one is two neuron reflex arc. So this is actually a two neuron reflex arc. Meanwhile, for 6.3 diagram, it is a three neuron reflex arc. What does this mean? It means that three neuron means it got involved sensory and then the relay neuron, then the motor. But this one, it just involves sensory and the motor neuron. That's why it's called two neuron reflex arc. So how are you going to write the similarities and differences? So yeah, this is involuntary response, and then yeah, it involves two neurons, and the 6.3 involves three neurons. Or you can write it is two neuron reflex arcs, or you can say three neuron reflex arc. Okay, and then moving on to this part right here is yeah the end of the synaptic knob, and K is the mitochondria. The vesicle is a synaptic vesicle whereby it releases the neurotransmitter. So function of structure K in transmission of information from one neuron to another neuron. Yeah, mitochondria, what does it do? It generates energy, right? So that is a very obvious answer. And generate energy to do what? Is for the release of neurotransmitter. So yeah, it allows the vesicle to release neurotransmitter into this across the synapse. And then, alamak, sorry. Okay, moving on to the next one. Misuse of stimulants and depressant drugs for long term will affect the person's health and then explain the effect. So stimulant is actually the one that will make you go high. Okay, it stimulates you, okay? So yeah, it's the one that will increase the production of neurotransmitter. Therefore, that when you increase production and release of the neurotransmitter, there will be more transmission of nerve impulse. More transmission of nerve impulse means your nervous system activity is very high. So you will tend to have a more, higher breathing rate, blood pressure, and it will actually make you become very high. So how you explain very high? Cause temporary euphoria if you eat it excessively lah. But it will eventually lead to depression lah. And what about depressant? So depressant is what like what I mentioned previously is the one that will reduce the production of neurotransmitter. Therefore, there will be a lower transmission of impulse. And then when there's a lower transmission of impulse, the activity rate is lower. That's why you tend to feel more relaxed lah. But how are you going to explain effect? Okay, the effect you can explain all these things lah. But last but not least, it will actually leads to like, memory loss and yeah, memory loss, lose ability to focus maybe because you're too relaxed. Maybe organ damage now. So these are actually the effect of it. Okay, so you can see the differences between them. One is speed up the transmission of impulse, therefore you become very high. And that, yeah, eventually you have a higher heart rate. But the present, it makes you feel calm. So it actually slow down everything. So that's the main difference you can differentiate between them. So you, other than that, you can also mention example because yeah, they also, yeah, they also got mentioned the example of it. So it actually increase the release of it. So when you increase the release, you will speed up the transmission of impulse. When you speed up transmission of impulse, you tend to have a higher activity rate. That's why it will increase the heart rate and make you go very happy, euphoria, and followed by depression. And if you long term consume it, yeah, cause circulatory system problems, psychological stresses, all those things. And what about the depressant? So yeah, the example of depressant, I mean they should change it to depressant with better like won't confuse students. So the example of it, yeah, got morphine, got alcohol. So what does it actually do? It will inhibit the release of neurotransmitter. So when you lesser, it will slow down the transmission of nerve impulses. Therefore, yeah, it makes that person feel relaxed, lower down the heart rate. And long term, yeah, is this lose ability to focus, memory loss. Okay, so these are the effects of it and how you explain it in detail. Normally, when you want to explain, you mention about the transmission of nerve impulse. Lesser release of the neurotransmitter leads to lower transmission of nerve impulse. And by taking a look at this question, okay, it shows one person playing badminton and he removing his hand when accidentally touching a hot kettle. So obviously, when you play badminton, it is a voluntary action, and 10.3 is involuntary action. So how are you going to compare and contrast between them? There are actually lots of things to compare and contrast. You can say both of them involve stimulus now, right? And both also involve the transmission of impulse. So when you compare and contrast, remember to state what is the similarity first, and you only draw a table for the differences. So differences, you write diagram 10.2 and then another column diagram 10.3. So what are you going to compare? First of all, you know it is one is voluntary, one another one is involuntary. So yeah, here are the similarities and difference. Both involve stimulation, both involve transmission of impulse, involve neurons, effectors, skeletal muscle response, and both of them involving three neurons lah. Only the knee jerk whereby we learn involve two neurons. And another thing to actually another tips lah, because you know that all of them involve auditing. So you write it in a separate sentence, both involve stimulation, transmission, neurons, effector. Okay, because if you just straight out write the whole thing, both involve stimulus, transmission of impulse, comma, neurons, effectors, you just write out in a one full sentence, they may only just give you 1 mark lah. So normally, I suggest students to separate the points, like got stimulus, transmission, and impulse, right? Don't write both involve stimulus and transmission of impulse. You write it in a second point. Yeah. Okay, and then how are you going to differentiate between them? Yeah, one of it is a controlled action, or you can say voluntary lah. Then, yeah, remember the title you have to write diagram 10.2. This one is diagram 10.3. So you can see it's spontaneous, yeah, and then controlled by who and involve which nervous system, somatic nervous system, or is it autonomic nervous system? And one of it needs to wait for instruction from the brain, another one doesn't need to wait. Okay, now let's move on to this. Also the same thing, name neuron P and neuron Q. So neuron P is the sensory neuron, neuron Q is the motor neuron. And followed by what is a structure R and state its role. Structure R is a dorsal root ganglion. So what does dorsal root ganglion do? It is to locate the cell bodies of sensory neuron. Okay, so for the gray matter is the one that consists of cell body of motor neuron and the relay neuron. But dorsal root ganglion is the one that consists of cell body of sensory neuron. Dorsal root ganglion. And describe pathway of nerve impulse that causes the action to occur. So it basically, it touched a flame and then it just retract its hand, remove its hand away. So first of all, mention what is the stimulus. Okay, when the hand touches the candle flame, the hot candle flame, the sensory receptor will get stimulated. So when the sensory receptor, okay, when you touch it, then you mention sensory receptor, it will get stimulated. And then you talk about nerve impulse is triggered. This is the third point, trigger nerve impulse. You trigger nerve impulse, you send the nerve impulse. So you send the nerve impulse to your spinal cord right here. So you send nerve impulse through this neuron. Okay, send nerve impulse. This is the fourth point. Okay, through the sensory and the relay neuron. Yeah, to the spinal cord. And you can also, yeah, mention the transmission of impulse is across the synapse. That's another point you can actually mention. Then after you send to the spinal cord, you can straight up mention what happened to your motor neuron. Your motor neuron also send nerve impulse. Send nerve impulse to who? The effector. So when you send nerve impulse to effector, effector will produce a response by contracting. Effector contract causing what is the action? Hand to be put away from the candle flame. So it's like a story lah, okay? Yeah. So that basically answers the whole thing. Touches, sensory receptor, trigger nerve impulse, transmit nerve impulse. Sensory neuron is the one that transmit. And then you can say transmit across the synapse. And what about motor neuron? It will transmit to the effector, or you can say the muscle in specific. What do the muscle do? Contract. What is the action? Put away from the candle flame. So there are actually a lot of points to mention right here. Okay, and this is the pathway. Now let's compare the action T and action U. Action T is actually writing. So it's a voluntary action. U is a peristalsis. What is bolus? Maybe you can't really recall what is this thing, students may panic lah, okay. So it's basically what happens in your esophagus. So once you eat your food, right? Yeah, the food you actually form like a bolus. Yeah, then it will actually go down to your stomach through passing through this esophagus. In order for it to go down, right? Yeah, there will be an action which is performed by your smooth muscle. So normally action that is performed by your smooth muscle is a involuntary action. So what is the involuntary action called is a peristalsis. I mean, this one is precise way lah. This one is writing. And the skeletal, the muscle that involved is a skeletal muscle, since this one is a voluntary action. All right. So this is how you can, I mean, when you want to compare, how you going to compare? One of it involuntary, one of it voluntary. But don't forget not only differences, remember to compare the similarities. So both also involve stimulus, both involve also the same thing like just now lah. But what about differences? Yeah, one of it voluntary, one of it involuntary. And then, yeah, involve external stimuli and internal, and actions is done unconsciously. Do you really know that, oh, I have to do paralysis? No, right? We didn't do it, it just happened unconsciously. And for involuntary action, involve autonomic and yeah, controlled by which part of your brain. And the effectors is a smooth muscle. Meanwhile, for this is skeletal muscle. Yeah, of course, got involved glands, also cardiac muscle. Yeah, so this is how you differentiate between them. And for this, what is actually the importance of this involuntary response? You know, to move your finger away. So it is a reflex action. Okay, why you have to do it so quick? Normally, it won't actually wait instruction from the brain, and is to protect yourself from further injury. So react spontaneously and to avoid further injury. These are the importances of the response. And moving on to the next one is also the same thing. One of it is eating, okay? Because you can pick what you eat, so it's something voluntary. You want to eat, so it's voluntary. And this one also the same thing. Yeah, it's more detailed diagram, like won't make students panic. That one maybe will make students panic because they don't know what is the bolus thingy, maybe. So compare, yeah, it's also the same thing. I'm not going to mention again, and you can actually, yeah, for differences, I know the answer scheme, they straight out mention the point, but it is more better if you could write it in a, I mean, it is highly encouraged to write in a full sentence. Action A is voluntary action. Action B is involuntary action. I know I always present the answers here until you used to the way of how they write out the point, but you as a student must, because you are the one sitting for exam, so you must write it in a full sentence. Is involuntary action. Yeah. And action A involve external stimuli. Yeah, this is how you differentiate. It's the same thing lah, basically. And then for this one, talking about excessive alcohol content. So affects the man driving. So if you notice just now, the depressant, right? They got say example is the alcohol. So it actually makes you very, it will it will make you kind of like, you know, not conscious of what you are doing if you consume alcohol. So the reason why you are not really conscious is because it will actually slow down your nerve impulse transmission. So this is how you actually explain to it. Alcohol slows down impulse transmission across the synapse. Then how are you going to explain the effect of it? Affect the man driving. So you have to actually emphasize on the man's driving. So yeah, the reason why it may lead to car accident, that's why they always emphasize you cannot, you know, drink alcohol content and drive. Okay, so yeah, poor estimation of distance and then disrupt your poor vision. You may eventually have hallucination, maybe, and therefore leads to car accident. So yeah, that's the explanation on how excessive alcohol content affects the man driving. That's why you drive in a very scary way, reckless driving. Okay, slow down because your reaction also slow down already. So yeah. can't control yourself well. And for this one, it's talking about lack of type of neurotransmitter. Illness suffered by this man and suggests a method that can be taken helping the man. So you first of all you can state what is the illness first. Then you elaborate what is this guy experiencing? Why is he having this illness? So this trembling, right? When yeah, this person keep tremble, the hand. You can also write it as a part of symptoms. Yeah, illness suffered by this man, and how are you going to suggest? So remember to allocate marks lah, because maybe students used to just write this part and forgot the method part. So remember, you have to suggest method to be taken lah. Okay, that's how you only score the full marks for it. So this person basically having this Parkinson disease. They got mentioned lack of a type of neurotransmitter. But if you still can remember, right, he actually lack of dopamine neurotransmitter. That's the reason why, you know, when you lack of dopamine transmitter, it will actually affect your nervous system. So how it affect? Yeah, it cause the trembling of the hands, limbs. So very hard to balance the body and the posture. And how are you going to suggest the explanation of illness already explained. Now you are going to explain suggest a method. So how are you going to suggest? So maybe you can see, oh, this is actually K-but lah. So maybe you can think lah, since this person lack of dopamine, maybe you can provide medication with dopamine, right? Yeah, to since he lack ma, so you can provide medication. Or maybe since this person, he can't really walk that well since his limbs kept trembling, maybe you can suggest for physiotherapy, or maybe you can say provide him the tongkat to walk well. So yeah, basically this is how you answer it. So this one is talking about explanation of the illness. And this one is the method to help. Okay, this one they didn't say like treat or cure or something ma. They just said helping the man live his daily life. That's why you can suggest like, oh, you can use stick for walking stick lah, and get professional care. But if they ask in more detail how to treat it, yeah, you have to talk about medication. Yeah, probably lah. So this is how you actually answer the question. But most importantly, you have to write it in paragraph form better lah. So the mark examiner, the person who marks it knows which part you're mentioning because you divide into a few paragraphs. Alright, so yeah, by looking at these chapter questions, you can directly see that nervous system is a hot topic and you have to take more, I mean, put more focus in it, especially I mean, most of them also got talked about like involuntary, voluntary, and then the effect of the drug, maybe sedative or the stimulant. So, what about the transmission of impulse? You also have to know the neurons to differentiate between them. So, yeah, these are all the importance part of where you have to put focus on. So yeah, that's all for this chapter, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for your time. Don't forget to subscribe my YouTube channel to support me. Okay, bye bye. Okay, good luck.